The fearful encounter. Tilna, a tiny alien girl from a distant planet, huddled behind a large mossy rock. Her small, glowing eyes darted around, scanning the unfamiliar terrain. Her body trembled with fear, her two delicate antennae twitching at every sound. She had crash-landed on this strange planet, a human colony, after her small escape pod malfunctioned. The stories she had heard about humans filled her with dread. They were said to be cruel, ruthless, and terrifying creatures who dominated planets with their brute strength and advanced technology. The forest around her was eerily quiet, except for the occasional chirp of strange creatures. She tightened her grip on the sharp piece of metal she had salvaged from her escape pod. It wasn't much, but it made her feel a little safer. Telna's small frame barely stood out among the dense bushes, but she knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. She needed food, water, and a way to repair her pod. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the human settlement came into view. It was a small, bustling village with simple homes made of metal and wood. Lights twinkled from the windows, and laughter echoed in the air. Telna crouched lower, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to get closer to find food, but every step she took brought her closer to danger, or so she believed. Suddenly, a noise startled her. A small boy, no older than 10 human years, appeared near her hiding spot. His curly hair bounced as he ran through the forest, chasing a glowing butterfly-like creature. Telna froze. Her glowing eyes widened as she watched the boy. He was laughing, his face full of joy and curiosity, so different from the terrifying humans she had imagined. The boy, named Max, paused when he noticed a faint glow in the shadows. Intrigued, he stepped closer, peering into the darkness. Telna held her breath, clutching her makeshift weapon tightly. Her mind raced. Should she run? Attack? Stay hidden? Her fear rooted her to the spot. Max squinted, and his face lit up when he spotted Telna. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice filled with concern instead of the menace Telna had expected. His words were strange to her, but his tone was gentle. Telna didn't move. She watched him warily, her antennae trembling. Max crouched down, trying to appear less threatening. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," he said, holding out his hand. In it was a small, shiny object, a piece of candy. He didn't know what else to offer, but hoped it would show he meant no harm. Telna stared at the candy, confused and hesitant. She had never seen anything like it before. Was it a trap? Her stomach growled loudly, betraying her hunger. Max heard it and smiled. "You're hungry, aren't you? Here, take it." The boy's kindness puzzled Telna. She had expected shouting, chasing, or even weapons. But this human was different. Slowly, she reached out her tiny, clawed hand and grabbed the candy. She sniffed it cautiously before taking the small bite. The sweetness surprised her, and for a moment, her fear faded. But the moment was short-lived. Voices echoed through the forest, other humans calling for Max. Telna's heart raced. She scurried back into the shadows, her glowing eyes fixed on the boy. Max stood up, turning toward the voices. "I'm here," he shouted back. Before leaving, Max glanced back at Telna. "Don't worry. I'll come back," he whispered with a reassuring smile. Then he ran off toward the voices, leaving Telna alone once more. As she watched him disappear, a strange feeling began to grow in Telna's chest. Was it relief? Curiosity? Hope? She wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. This encounter had shaken her beliefs about humans. Perhaps they weren't all the monsters she had been told about. Still, her fear kept her cautious. She decided to stay hidden for now, but a part of her couldn't help wondering what would happen if Max kept his promise. The night deepened, and Telna remained in her hiding spot, her mind racing. She clutched the candy wrapper tightly in her hand, a strange symbol of a moment she couldn't quite understand. The humans were dangerous, she reminded herself. But Max was different. The discovery. The next morning, Soft rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, gently waking Tilna from her uneasy sleep. She stretched her tiny limbs, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Her crash landing had left her bruised, and the cold ground hadn't helped. As she rubbed her arms, her gaze wandered toward the human village in the distance. A part of her hoped the boy wouldn't return. The less contact she had with humans, the safer she would be. But deep down, curiosity tugged at her thoughts. Why had he been kind? The candy wrapper, now crumpled in her hand, felt heavier than it should. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke the silence. Tilna tensed, shrinking deeper into the bushes. Her glowing eyes peered through the leaves, searching for the source. It was Max. He stumbled into view, carefully stepping over branches as if not to startle anything or anyone. In his hands, he carried a small cloth bag. His eyes darted around, scanning the forest with the same curiosity as before. Tilna pressed herself against the tree trunk, heart racing. Why did he come back? "Hey, I know you're here," Max said softly, setting the bag down in the grass. "I brought food. And, water too." He took out a canteen and placed it beside the bag. His voice held no hint of fear or anger, just quiet kindness. Tilna didn't move. She wasn't sure if she wanted to. Max sat cross-legged, leaning his chin in his hands as he waited. Minutes passed. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, but neither of them spoke. Finally, Tilna's hunger won the battle. Slowly, cautiously, she emerged from the shadows. Her small figure barely made a sound as she approached, her eyes never leaving Max. She stopped a few feet away, unsure if she should get any closer. Max smiled but didn't reach out. Instead, he simply pushed the bag toward her. "It's okay. Take what you need." Tilna knelt down, her fingers trembling as she opened the bag. Inside, she found slices of bread, fruit, and a small blanket. The simplicity of the offering left her stunned. Humans were supposed to be selfish, weren't they? "Where are your weapons?" Tilna finally spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. Her translator crackled as it tried to adapt to the human language. Max chuckled, shaking his head. "I didn't bring any. Why would I?" Tilna frowned, clearly puzzled. "Humans always carry weapons." "Not all of us," Max said with a shrug. "My dad says not everything has to be a fight." Tilna's antennae twitched as she processed his words. Her people never spoke of humans this way. Were there more like him? As she nibbled on the bread, Max pulled a small device from his pocket and fiddled with it. Tilna's eyes narrowed, watching carefully. "It's just a toy," he explained, holding up a spinning top that whirred in his hand. "I thought you might like to see it." Tilna stared, unsure of what to make of the strange object. But as the top spun on the grass, humming gently, she found herself captivated by the simple, harmless act. A faint smile tugged at her lips. A rare sight. For the first time, the fear she had carried so heavily began to feel a little lighter. The unexpected kindness. Tilna sat beneath the shade of a large tree, the small blanket Max had brought wrapped around her shoulders. She still didn't fully trust him, or any human, for that matter, but the warmth of the bread and fruit in her belly dulled the sharp edge of fear she had felt since landing here. Max sat nearby, sketching something in the dirt with a stick. He had stopped trying to fill the silence, letting her presence settle naturally. The soft hum of the spinning top still echoed faintly, resting now between them like a fragile bridge neither wanted to break. But the calm was fleeting. In the distance, Tilna's sharp hearing picked up the unmistakable sound of human voices, several of them. Her muscles tensed immediately. More humans were coming. Max noticed her reaction. "It's just my dad and the others," he said quickly, hoping to calm her. "They're working on the water tanks near the forest. They won't come this way." But Tilna's fear didn't fade. What if they did? She knew that humans often acted differently in groups. One child's kindness might not be enough to stop the others. "I should leave," Tilna muttered, rising to her feet. Her antennae twitched as she scanned the forest for a safe path. Max stood as well, his brows knitting in concern. "Wait, where will you go? You're hurt, and your ship is broken. Let me help you fix it." Tilna hesitated. Could he really help her? "I can find parts in the village," Max offered. "My dad works with machines. I bet I can get some tools too." Before she could respond, the approaching voices grew louder. Max's eyes widened slightly. "They're closer than I thought." "Come with me," he said, grabbing the blanket and bag. Tilna stepped back, her heart racing. "I can't. You'll be safer at my house. It's on the edge of the village, far from where they are." For a long moment, Tilna stood frozen, torn between fear and the unfamiliar warmth of trust that Max had planted in her heart. But when the distant crunch of footsteps echoed too close, she made her choice. "Fine," she whispered. Max led her carefully through the trees, avoiding the main path. They stayed low, weaving between bushes and under low-hanging branches until the forest thinned. Beyond it, the village stretched out, its modest buildings glowing under the afternoon sun. Tilna clung to the edge of the woods, her glowing eyes narrowing at the sight of the human settlement. Smoke curled from chimneys, and laughter spilled from the streets. It looked peaceful. "I'll sneak you in through the back," Max said, motioning for her to follow. "My mom's inside, but she won't tell anyone." Tilna hesitated at the edge of the village. Every instinct screamed at her to run the other way, but Max's calmness anchored her. She followed him, keeping her steps light and silent. They slipped through a narrow alley behind Max's home, a modest metal structure with large solar panels on the roof. Max pushed open a creaky door and gestured for Tilna to enter. The inside was warm, filled with strange but pleasant smells. Tilna's nose twitched as she scanned the room. Tools, shelves, and soft cushions scattered about. "Mom," Max called softly. A woman appeared from another room, wiping her hands on a towel. Her dark hair was tied back, and she looked at Max curiously. When her gaze shifted to Tilna, her eyes softened with understanding rather than shock. "Oh," she said gently, "you found her." Tilna's antennae shot up. Had she known about her? Max scratched his head. "I told you about the crash I saw last week. I think she's from that ship." Tilna's heart pounded as the woman approached, but there was no aggression in her movements. She knelt to Tilna's level, offering a warm smile. "You don't have to be afraid here," she said. "We won't let anyone hurt you." Tilna stared into the woman's eyes, searching for deception, but finding none. "You knew I was here?" Tilna asked softly. "I had a feeling," Max's mom replied. "There were strange noises in the woods, but I figured if you meant harm, we'd know by now." Max grinned. "Told you my mom was cool." For the first time since her crash, Tilna felt the weight of constant fear lift, if only a little. That night, Tilna sat by the window, wrapped in a new blanket Max's mom had given her. Through the glass, she watched the stars twinkle, wondering if her people were out there searching for her. But for now, she wasn't alone. And that, she realized, was enough. Learning trust. The days passed slowly, but Tilna remained hidden in Max's home, tucked away in the small attic space above his room. It wasn't much, just a cozy corner lined with soft blankets and pillows Max had gathered, but it felt safer than the cold, vast forest outside. At first, she barely left the attic, venturing out only when Max's parents assured her it was safe. His mother, Lena, would often bring her food and warm drinks, speaking to her in a soft tone, as if Tilna were something fragile that might break at any moment. Max, on the other hand, treated her like she was no different from him. "Come on," Max said one morning, holding up an old tablet. "You can't stay hidden forever. Let me show you something." Tilna eyed the device warily, still unsure about human technology, but her curiosity won out, and she shuffled closer as Max powered it on. A bright image filled the screen, an animated show, loud and colorful, unlike anything she had ever seen. The characters danced across the screen, laughing and singing in ways that felt strange but oddly comforting. "What is this?" Tilna asked, her head tilting slightly. Max grinned. "It's just a cartoon. Humans watch these all the time. It's fun, right?" Tilna didn't answer right away. Her people didn't create things like this. Everything on her home planet was built with purpose and precision. Entertainment was rare and almost always tied to learning or training. Watching something that served no real function felt unnecessary. But as the episode continued, she found herself leaning closer. The bright colors and simple jokes made her chest feel lighter, almost like she had forgotten to be afraid. "I guess it's not bad," she admitted quietly, though the small smile tugging at her lips betrayed her real thoughts. Max laughed. "Told you. Humans aren't all scary, you know." Tilna's smile faded slightly. Weren't they? The stories her elders told weren't born from nothing. Humans had hurt her people before. They were conquerors, always expanding, always taking. And yet, here she was wrapped in a blanket, watching cartoons with one of them. Later that day, Max's father, Ben, came home early from work, his hands covered in grease. Tilna stayed out of sight, watching him from the attic vent as he unloaded tools from his pack. He spoke with Lena in hushed tones, though she caught pieces of their conversation. Another patrol came through the village, Ben said, shaking his head. "They're looking for something, or someone." Tilna's stomach twisted into knots. Were they searching for her? Lena frowned, her eyes drifting toward the ceiling where Tilna hid. "We'll keep her safe," she said firmly. "She's just a child." Ben sighed but nodded. "I know, but if they find out we're hiding an alien," his voice trailed off, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. Tilna pulled away from the vent, curling into the blankets. She was putting them in danger. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her glowing eyes stared at the ceiling as guilt twisted inside her. These humans, Max and his family, had shown her nothing but kindness. They didn't owe her anything, yet they risked their safety for her. By morning, she had made up her mind. "I should leave," Tilna said softly as Max brought her breakfast. Max's head snapped up. "What? Why?" "I'm putting your family at risk," she replied. "If humans find out I'm here, they'll punish you." Max frowned, sitting beside her on the attic floor. "You don't have to go. No one will find out. I promise." Tilna shook her head. "Your father is worried. I heard him." Max was silent for a moment, staring at the floor. Then, without warning, he stood and left the attic. Tilna watched him go, unsure if she had upset him. But a few minutes later, Max returned, holding a small device in his hand. "It's a translator," he said, placing it beside her. "My dad uses it for work sometimes. It can help you talk to people if you ever need to." Tilna's eyes widened in surprise. "Why are you giving this to me?" Max smiled faintly. "Because I don't want you to leave. But if you do, I want you to be safe." Tilna stared at the translator, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. Humans weren't supposed to care like this. Her antennae twitched slightly, and for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar bloom inside her chest. Trust. A growing bond. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Tilna's fear of humans began to shift into something she didn't quite understand. Comfort. The attic in Max's home became more than just a hiding place. It felt, in a strange way, like a second home. Each morning, Max would slip into the attic after his chores, bringing her books, strange human tools, or little gadgets his father no longer used. At first, Tilna didn't understand why he tried so hard. She wasn't like him. She wasn't even from the same world. But Max didn't seem to care. "Here, this is a solar battery," Max said one afternoon, holding up a round object the size of his palm. He twisted it in his hands until a small light flickered on the side. "It stores sunlight and can power small things for a few hours." Tilna took it carefully, turning it over in her hands. She could tell the technology was basic compared to the tools her people used, but the thought behind it warmed her chest. "Your people use these?" she asked softly. Max nodded. "Yeah, we have to. This colony isn't exactly rich in resources." Tilna's eyes flicked toward the window, where she could see the outskirts of the village through a small crack in the wall. The buildings looked old and patched together. Even the streets seemed worn. "Why stay here?" she asked, tilting her head. "Your kind could leave. Find a better place." Max laughed, shaking his head. "It's not that simple. My parents were born here. And besides, this place is home. You don't just leave home because it's hard to live in." Tilna's antennae twitched thoughtfully. Her own people would have left without hesitation if survival became too difficult. But humans, they stayed even when things crumbled around them. She found herself fascinated by their stubbornness. One evening, as Max's family gathered around the dinner table below, Tilna sat by the attic window, gazing at the stars. The faint hum of the translator Max had given her buzzed softly by her side. A light knock on the attic trapdoor caught her attention. Max's voice followed soon after. "Hey, you up there?" Tilna slid the door open just enough to see his face peeking through. "I brought you something," Max said, holding up a small rectangular object. Curiosity piqued. Tilna opened the trapdoor fully and sat down beside him. Max handed her the object, a tablet. Its screen flickered to life, showing a collection of what looked like books and maps. "What is this?" she asked, tapping the screen carefully. Max grinned. "It's a school tablet. I thought, maybe you'd want to learn more about Earth. You know, human stuff." Tilna hesitated. "Why would I need to know that?" Max shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe you'll stay here longer than you think." His words caught her off guard. She had always assumed she would leave the moment her ship was repaired. That was the plan. Get the parts she needed, fix her pod, and return to her people. But now she wasn't so sure. As the days passed, Tilna found herself sitting with Max more often, learning human words, reading their stories, and even helping Max with his schoolwork. Despite being an alien, Tilna's advanced knowledge of physics and engineering far surpassed his, making her a surprisingly good tutor. "Wait, you mean the engines in your ships can fold space?" Max asked one day, his eyes wide with disbelief. Tilna nodded. "Yes, it's the most efficient way to travel. Doesn't your kind do the same?" Max shook his head. "No way. We're stuck with slow engines and old tech. We haven't figured out space folding yet." Tilna blinked, genuinely surprised. For the first time, she realized just how far behind humans were compared to her species. And yet, they still managed to survive, thrive even, in environments as harsh as this colony. "You humans are strange," she said, though there was no malice in her voice, only quiet admiration. Max laughed. "Yeah, I get that a lot." But the peaceful days wouldn't last forever. One afternoon, as Max and Tilna sat quietly reading, a faint buzzing sound filled the air outside. Tilna's sensitive hearing caught it first, and she tensed immediately. "What's that?" she asked, standing and moving toward the window. Max followed, his eyes narrowing. "Oh no, that's a patrol drone." Tilna's heart sank. Patrol drones meant one thing. Someone was searching for something. "They're scanning the village," Max said, his voice low. "They do that sometimes, but they've never come this close to our house." Tilna's glowing eyes fixed on the distant drone, watching as it hovered near the treetops. It wasn't random. They were looking for her. "We need to hide you," Max said quickly, grabbing her arm. But Tilna pulled away. "No, I can't keep hiding. If they find me here, your family will be in danger." Max frowned, clearly torn. "Then what do we do?" Tilna glanced at the old solar battery on the floor. Her mind raced with ideas. "I have a plan," she said, her voice steady. "But I'll need your help." For the first time since her crash, Tilna wasn't running. She was standing her ground, ready to face whatever came next. The rescue mission. The drone hovered just beyond the edge of the village, its sleek, black frame blending into the overcast sky. From the attic window, Tilna's sharp eyes followed its every movement. Her antennae twitched slightly as the faint hum of its scanner pulsed across the rooftops. "They're getting closer," Max muttered, pacing nervously beside her. They never scanned this deep into the village. Tilna tightened the blanket around her shoulders, but it did little to ease the cold knot forming in her chest. "They weren't here by accident. This isn't a routine patrol," she whispered. "They're searching for me." Max's jaw tensed. "Then we'll hide you. You can stay in the attic until—" "No," Tilna interrupted firmly. She stepped away from the window, facing Max with a rare look of certainty. "If they find me here, your family will be blamed. I won't let that happen." Max opened his mouth to argue, but Tilna raised a hand to stop him. "I've already put you in enough danger," she said softly. "It's time for me to leave." Max frowned, his fists clenching. "Leave and go where?" "The forest isn't safe. And what if they have more drones out there?" Tilna hesitated, glancing down at the small solar battery Max had given her days before. An idea was already forming in the back of her mind. A risky one, but it was the only chance she had. "I need to fix my escape pod," she said finally. "If I can repair it, I can leave this planet before the patrols find me." Max crossed his arms. "And how exactly are you going to do that? Half the parts on your pod are probably fried." Tilna gave him a small, knowing smile. "That's why I need your help." Later that evening, Max's father, Ben, sat at the kitchen table, sipping from a steaming mug as he listened to Max and Tilna explain their plan. His brow furrowed deeply, and for a long while, he said nothing. "You're asking me to steal parts from the scrapyard," Ben finally said, placing his mug down with a soft clink. His eyes flickered to Tilna. "You realize if anyone catches us, we'll all be in trouble." Tilna nodded solemnly. "I understand the risk, but I won't ask you to do anything you aren't willing to." Ben rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Across the table, Lena folded her arms, casting a pointed glance at her husband. "She's just a child, Ben. We can't let her go out there alone." Ben exhaled slowly, shaking his head. I know, but sneaking around patrols and drones, that's not exactly safe either." Max leaned forward. "Dad, we have to try. She's been hiding here for weeks. We can't keep pretending this will blow over." A heavy silence settled over the room. Finally, Ben ran a hand through his graying hair and let out a low chuckle. "You've got your mother's stubbornness," he muttered. "I get it from both of you," Max shot back with a grin. Ben sighed. "All right, I'll take you to the scrapyard tomorrow night, but only if we're careful. One wrong move and we all lay low for a while." "Understood." Max and Tilna exchanged hopeful glances. "Understood." The scrapyard. Midnight. The scrapyard stretched out beneath the pale glow of the moon, a sprawling wasteland of discarded machines, broken drones, and rusted ship parts. Ben led the way, his flashlight flickering across the heaps of twisted metal. Tilna followed closely behind, her antennae twitching as she scanned for any signs of movement. Max walked beside her, carrying a large canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "Stay close," Ben whispered as they weaved between the stacks of scrap. The patrol drones sometimes scanned this area. Tilna's glowing eyes flickered with curiosity as she examined the broken technology around her. Much of it was primitive by her people's standards, but here and there, she spotted pieces that could be repurposed. "There," she whispered, pointing to a cluster of metallic panels. "Those look like stabilizer coils. I can use them to repair my pod's thrusters." Ben nodded, crouching down to inspect the parts. "Good eye. Max, help me pull these out." As they worked, Tilna's gaze drifted to the horizon. Beyond the scrapyard, the faint red lights of another drone flickered against the dark sky. Her heart quickened. They were still searching. "We need to hurry," she said softly. Max grunted as he pulled free one of the coils, dusting off the rust. Almost done. Suddenly, the air filled with the sharp hum of an approaching drone. Tilna's eyes snapped to the source. A small surveillance drone hovered just beyond the fence, its scanner sweeping slowly across the scrapyard. Ben's eyes widened. Get down. Now. The three of them ducked behind a large pile of scrap, holding their breath as the drone passed overhead. Tilna could hear the faint whirring of its engines as it hovered dangerously close. Max's hand brushed against hers, his fingers trembling slightly. Tilna didn't move. She watched the drone carefully, waiting until the red lights faded into the distance. Ben exhaled quietly. All right. We've got what we need. Let's get out of here. They moved swiftly, slipping through the gaps in the fence and disappearing into the forest. Tilna clutched the canvas bag tightly, her heart racing with a mix of fear and hope. As they reached the village outskirts, Max leaned toward her. We did it. Tilna nodded, offering him a rare smile. Thank you, Max. I couldn't have done this without you. Max grinned. Hey, what are friends for? For the first time since arriving on this planet, Tilna felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A new beginning. Tilna sat cross-legged beneath the open sky, her hands carefully aligning the scavenged stabilizer coils beside her broken escape pod. The sleek, silver vessel lay hidden beneath a thick canopy of trees just outside the village, partially buried beneath leaves and branches to avoid detection. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Max sat nearby, watching quietly as she worked. The coils sparked faintly as Tilna twisted them into place, her delicate hands moving with practiced precision. Despite her small frame, there was a confidence in her actions that Max had grown to admire. How long do you think it'll take to fix? Max asked, resting his chin on his knees. Tilna paused, tightening a panel before glancing up at the stars. A few more days, maybe less. Max frowned slightly. He didn't know why, but hearing that filled him with an odd sense of sadness. She was leaving. You don't have to rush, you know, he added casually. The patrols haven't been back in a while. Tilna smiled faintly, but there was something distant in her gaze. I can't stay forever. Max. Her words lingered between them, heavier than the quiet night air. The next day, Tilna crouched by the stream that flowed near the village's edge, watching small fish dart beneath the water's surface. Their shimmering scales reflected the morning sunlight, and for a moment, she allowed herself to forget everything. The patrols, the broken pod, the looming farewell. Max sat beside her, skipping stones across the water. His aim was terrible, but that didn't stop him from trying. You know, Max said after several failed attempts, you've never really told me what your planet is like. Tilna's antennae twitched as she thought about it. It's quiet, cold, mostly. But the sky is beautiful at night. You can see nebulae drifting across the horizon, and sometimes the ground glows beneath your feet. Max grinned. Sounds like something out of a movie. Tilna chuckled softly. To me, this place feels like something out of a story. She glanced at him. Humans are strange, Max. But you're different from what I expected. Max tossed another stone. This time, it skipped twice before sinking. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's not, she replied quietly. A comfortable silence settled between them, interrupted only by the gentle ripple of the stream. Later that evening, Tilna stood outside Max's home, gazing up at the stars. Her pod was nearly ready, just a few more adjustments, and she could leave. But as she looked at the glowing village behind her, she felt something she hadn't anticipated. Hesitation. The soft creak of the door behind her signaled Max's arrival. He stepped outside, carrying a small object wrapped in cloth. I made this for you, Max said, holding it out awkwardly. Tilna raised an eyebrow, gently unwrapping the gift. Inside was a small hand-carved figure. It was rough, slightly uneven, but clearly shaped to resemble her. Her antennae and large eyes were exaggerated, but it was unmistakably her. "You carved this?" she asked, surprised. Max rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, it's not perfect, but I thought maybe you could take it with you. Something to remember us by." Tilna's glowing eyes softened as she ran her fingers over the wooden figure. Humans were strange. "I don't think I'll forget," she replied, tucking the carving carefully into the folds of her cloak. "Thank you, Max." The night of departure. The forest was quiet as Tilna stood before her escape pod, now fully repaired and humming softly with energy. The stabilizer coils glowed faintly, and the cockpit was ready for takeoff. Max and his parents stood nearby, watching silently. Lena stepped forward, resting a hand gently on Tilna's shoulder. "You'll be safe out there." Tilna nodded. "I'll find my people. Don't worry." Ben crossed his arms. "Just make sure you don't forget about us little humans when you do." Tilna smirked. "I'll remember." Max stepped closer, his usual grin subdued. "Guess this is goodbye, huh?" "For now," Tilna said, "but I'll come back." Max raised an eyebrow. "Promise?" Tilna extended her hand, the human way. Max shook it firmly, smiling. "Promise." As Tilna climbed into the pod, she glanced one last time at the small family that had taken her in. She hadn't expected kindness. She hadn't expected to find friends. The pod's engines roared softly, lifting it off the ground. Max and his family stepped back, shielding their eyes from the bright light. And as the pod disappeared into the night sky, a small, hand-carved figure sat securely on the dashboard, a reminder that sometimes the scariest stories about humans weren't true. Sometimes they were the kindest of all.